We'll kick off with, I guess, some intros. Jason, do you want to talk a little bit about what you do and what your company does?
So, Business Development Director for Forbidden Technologies. Forscene is the product. I look after all of our international business relationships and the roadmap of Forscene.
As Jake said, I'm from Doc10, which is the studio's post-production and connectivity provider in Media City UK in Salford. And in my role, I look after new services, new ways of doing things outside of our current business as usual. So remote editing and cloud-based workflows is absolutely sat with me.
I'm Rowan Bray. I look after anything to do with post-production in the UK for Prime Focus. Prime Focus is a global company. We've got offices in 9 countries around the world, and therefore we have all sorts of collaborations across continents with our sister companies, and we have experience of what they're doing in other countries as well.
Okay, so as I said, we should talk about the potential of the cloud and also where we are now with the cloud as well. And maybe we'll start with Emma, because Emma and Doc10 are using Avid Central UX and starting to incorporate that into your general workflows and offering it to all your clients. Could you talk a little bit about what that offers you and what your clients are using it for at the moment, and we can sort of chat around that?
Sure. So at BVE this week, we've formally launched Avid Central UX as our starting point within a cloud-based or remote editing application. Avid Central UX is a browser-based tool, but also an iPhone and iPad app from Avid. And really what that does is open up a window into our ISIS and our post-production interplay world, allowing clients through any Wi-Fi network to be able to view what's on our system, what's on our storage system, so be able to view what our editors are seeing in their suites. We're using it for a variety of different applications, actually, which was really surprised us. We expected it to be used for viewing and general logging and general basic sync pulling as a one step down from a full Media Composer edit. But actually, we found all sorts of applications for it, where in short-form programming, in very topical, more sports or news productions that want to see things very quickly. To give you an example, we have a Referees Association who, on a Saturday afternoon, obviously, when there's lots of football games going on, there's referees at every single game. There's also referee officials who are looking at every incident and every decision that's made to be able to comment back in the press. All of those football games come into our system anyway because we produce Match of the Day later on. So we were able to offer up to every referee sat in different stadiums a near instant view of what was happening in a different stadium. We also used Central to be able to clip up, so they didn't have to watch the whole thing live. We were able to just take individual instances like red cards or yellow cards or those kind of things and put them together for a particular match. So the head referee, Mike Riley, could look through those before he went on to comment to the press. So a slightly non-broadcast, I would say, application of something to open up our editing platform.
And do you have any broadcast examples as yet?
Yes, sorry. One of the examples would be a Channel 5 observational a documentary series, was all based on Russian car cams, and it was kind of a bit of a you've been framed type show. And crucially for them, their talent, their scriptwriter, wasn't based in Salford where they were doing their edit. They wanted the producer to be able to see. He was a particularly comedic producer. They wanted him to be able to write the script. Now, previously, of course, we could have exported a DVD or put something on an FTP site. But what we're able to do with Central, because again we're looking at the same media on our central storage, is the scriptwriter was able to work from a country, actually, he was actually working from South Korea in Asia, to be able to see live how our sequence was coming together and add the script as logging notes as things were moving along in the edit. The producer in Salford was then able to voice it as and when they're going. So true collaboration, meaning that our production had access to talent that they wouldn't previously have been able to have access to be able to make that program.
And Rowan, do you have much demand for these kind of cloud-based services as yet?
Well, we work very closely with Red Bee, we're their facility provider, and they have about 60 creatives who are all accessing from an Avid Interplay set up copies of all the programs that they've got to do promos and trails for, from the BBC and UK TV. And last year we did 4,000 trails and promos from associated program material. So those 60 people with their laptops, wherever they are in the BBC or UK TV estate, are looking at this central material very efficiently, very effectively. And those logs and all the edit notes that they make are then being fed back into the finishing suites, where we're finishing promos every day and uploading 10, 15 items a day to transmission. So it's a very seamless workflow there. In India, we're using an Adobe product harnessed with our Clear-based platforms to actually run an entire TV station called Star TV. Star is bigger than Sky is in this country because it's the cyber Sky, but it does it in 13 languages across the whole of the Indian subcontinent. And so the programs are arriving from a variety of sources, being loaded into the Clear program platform using Adobe Anywhere, and then people are able to edit, log, note, do marketing, do legal compliance, and take it through to transmission. So the whole remote access system is not just the 80 suites of that television station, but also as many other people as want it as well. But in terms of sort of casual clients coming to the post house saying, we would like to edit, there's a real resistance at the minute to actually saying we'll do our program not all together in a room, sitting next to each other, talking about it. They might do a little bit of assemble clipping and that sort of thing, but they really don't want to not be there at the moment. There's a real resistance.
We'll come to that in a short while, future possibilities. And Jason, do you want to give me give everyone some examples of how people use Forscene?
Yeah, sure. Forscene launched at RBC 2004, so when people say cloud-based services are relatively new, we've been doing it for 10 years. But only in the last few years has it really taken off. So, for example, about 2010, we had 15, 20 productions in the UK, long-form productions using Forscene. End of last year, we had just under 130. So everything from kind of Gogglebox to The Voice using Forscene. Mostly it used to be for review and approval, but it's moved on significantly since then. So we added the logging. So these big series where you shoot, the shooting ratios are massive. And you got a few thousand hours. Something like Gold Rush has 3,500 hours of content shot on a single series. You need to be able to log all of that, make it searchable, and then actually cut things down to make it usable within the offline. So we have moved quite significantly from logging into rough cut editing, sync pulls within long form. But actually, we're moving quite significantly into full editing, but mostly in news and sport, not in the long form side.
So news and sports is very quick turnaround.
It's a quick turnaround.
Highlights packages.
Exactly. So, for example, we do the European tour with our client Delta Tray. So that is about bringing in live streams from around the world. You've got editors. We about 3 to 4 seconds behind the live feed. You get the stream coming into the platform. You're able to cut up highlights packages, add voiceover, graphics, and then publish directly from our system back into the station's websites, the YouTube channels, EuropeanTour.com website. And that is our fastest growing part of our business currently.
And do you have any examples of where you've had long-form broadcast projects using your editing functions to do like an assembly edit or anything like that?
Well, virtually all of those productions use us for logging and a form of sync pull, being able to whittle it down and then pass an EDL back to a traditional Avid and then be able to carry on. So it's a collaborative and streamlining the offline process. What's happened is we found a lot of observational kind of documentaries where you're not going necessarily back into the post house for some time. You want somebody that's out in the field to be able to actually cut the program down, see where they're getting. I'm going back into the field tomorrow, I'm going to start shooting, I need some more cutaways. So, for example, we had a program with Maverick for Channel 4, I think it was called Born This Way, where they had self-shooters out in the field, uploading the content directly from the Sony cameras up into the cloud, immediately be able to look at their material when they got home that night, cut sequences together, and only later, about 3-4 weeks later, they'd send the original source back to the post house. They would then ingest it then, and you could do a conform at that time. But we certainly see that as a room for growth, and that's where we're targeting going forward as Forscene, is to take more of the editorial part of offline.
And Emma, with Avid, Central UX, which is a horrible name, which I keep forgetting, keep having to read. Is that your model, do you think, for the future, for Doc10, for your clients?
With that particular application, we see it as more complementary to the offline process rather than a replacement. Going back to what Rowan was saying, two people sat in a room talking about the program, crafting the story together. We haven't really seen much of a replacement for that. Even with video conferencing and FaceTime and things like that, at some point, certainly within that whole offline process, you need those two people in a room. We're still very much seeing a bit of a resistance from splitting that totally. So we see Central, because it's not a full editor, as being complementary to that process. I think in the future, with things like Media Composer Cloud that Avid also have, I think we may find that the start of the offline process, being sat in a suite, starts to get eroded a little bit. So as Jason was saying, you may see, maybe even up to 50% of the offline process being replaced by more of the cloud, remote working, potentially not meaning that you have to sit in the same place in a suite to be able to do that. So Central is complementary at the moment.
And do you think that would work better on any certain type of genre of programming, or?
I think going back to what Jason said about high volumes is absolutely where logging and viewing, because sometimes you get shows that shoot so much that you can't physically watch the amount of hours that they've shot in the time that they have to edit. So being able to put those on different platforms and have different people viewing it is absolutely. I think also, as you said, news and sport, but also anything that's topical. In any way. So going back to the referees, it was because it was topical. It wasn't necessarily because it was sport. It was because we need that live, we need that instant feedback. We used Avid Central as a near live view of our studio feed for shows like The Voice UK last October, when the more management of the production company couldn't make it up to see the studio show. So they'd use that browser-based platform to be able to log in. And again, it's because it's topical, it's happening right there and then. They want to see what's happening in the studios instantly. So more of a collaboration.
Yeah, but less of a remote editing,
total replacement. Yeah. At the moment, anyway, I do think in the future we'll see more sophisticated NLEs eroding that offline process.
Well, Rowan, you were saying there's some resistance from your clients already.
Yeah, I suppose to a certain extent it defines what you mean by remote editing. Because if you go onto a blog and you look up remote editing, and guess what, I did that because of this session, you'll find people talking in 2005 about editing material collaboratively over the internet and using whatever devices were available to them, be it FTP or whatever else, to share media and send signals to each other to share what they were doing. I have no doubt that if you are a director working very closely with an editor of choice who you've worked with for years and years and years, and you're making a documentary over which you have both got an equal passion, you can upload that data, you can work on that program idea, you can do it collaboratively from different parts of the world, you can work on feature films in a similar way. And these things are already happening, and they're happening all over the place, and they might be happening through post houses or just directly. And people are actually already coming to the editing process in its holistic and biggest definition. If we're going to make this mainstream, we've got to think about a few very practical issues. We've got to think about what does that do for your program? Is it a more creative or a less creative process? Is it a more costly or a less costly process? Budgets are absolutely, for both production and post-production, a key driver into why we're all adopting new technologies. Is the program making process enhanced in any other way by this? So if you can get your post house to be your data curator, the person who actually looks after your data and makes it available to you to edit with in such a way that when you come to doing your finishing, it's as simple and as straightforward as possible. And then you can have a period of time when you can stand your production team down and just keep your core people and just get that mass of material turned into something sensible without using the real estate of a post house, because post houses now are having to provide edit suites of a certain size with a desk and a second desk and a sofa and light and everything else in the heart of town at a time when rents are roughly double what they were 5 years ago. And if you're a facility with, as some of our competitors have got 100, 150 suites, and the rate is coming down and down and down, you can't go on doing it that way, and people are being more scattered. So then you've got to look at the limitations of connectivity. I came across someone the other day who was working on a program, you're curating the data, but he lives in the middle of Nottingham, and he's doing an edit for a production that Doc 10 have got the media for. And he said that he's 3 days a week, he's not bothering to go over to Manchester to edit. He's actually doing it in his pyjamas, so to speak, at home, and going in Mondays and Fridays to chat with the production crew to develop the programme. Not to the nth degree, but in that initial stage of developing the edit. But he's got an editor friend 10 houses down his road in Nottingham who is also working on the same programme but cannot do the same thing because his 10 houses have taken him out of the best bit of connectivity within Nottingham and moved him just into the next bit where the bandwidth isn't quite so good and he can't stream the video. So we've got some real issues to deal with in actually just achieving all of this stuff. And I don't think we should look upon it as necessarily cheaper for the post house to look after your media, to give you technical support and so on and so forth. But in the long run, these are all ways of using technology to improve the production process, to introduce editors to the media earlier, to streamline everything to make the budgets go further and hopefully not spoil the creativity too much.
And in terms of that connectivity and getting your data in the first place, your rushes in, we'll start with Emma again. Field Doc is something you've created, isn't it, to help with the ingest process. Can you explain a little bit about that?
Yeah, so we obviously were looking into remote editing and remote working and Avid's platform and also other platforms. But we thought, well, the one thing, if we're really talking about speed and quickening up that edit process with true collaboration, then really we should look at ingest. We still had a very thriving, and still do have a very thriving ingest department, and they accept drives through the door on a daily, hourly basis, and they ingest media coming through from couriers or rushes runners coming on trains, and we just thought that it's just been accepted that that's just the way, and now going master file delivery with the DPP standards going over the internet, we thought, well, we should try and do something to change this ingest process. So Field Doc is something we've launched at BVE this week, and essentially it's a software application that allows media management from card to drive, which is what most media wranglers do on location anyway, but also in addition it allows a connectivity testing of wherever you are and a choice of workflow. So you can either send the native back, your rushes back, but if you, as you say, quite often do not have the connectivity that we all wish we did, you can then kick off a local transcode to an Avid editable proxy and think with 3 different flavors that you can choose from, depending on what your workflow is and what your connectivity is, to be able to move that media back to Doc 10's, either Doc 10's private cloud or into Doc 10's post-production environment. And then what we've been demoing at the show here is checking that into Interplay on an automated workflow and being able to immediately see it on a central UX platform. So we thought that why start in the middle of the process? We really need to start at the very beginning, capture ingest first, sort that out, and then hopefully we can drive remote editing from there.
Yeah, because then if you wanted to remote edit, it's all there. Even if it's a proxy, you can start work on that.
Exactly, and obviously we understand that we don't have a base in Soho, so as much as we would love for everyone to come to sunny Salford for all of their editing purposes, it's not as cold as you think. We understand that you may have a post house of choice, you may have an in-house facility, you may obviously go to Prime Focus. So we also offer bits being able to outgest that through the same kind of cloud-based portal, so that post houses like Prime Focus or Envy or Evolutions are able to download that Avid proxy. But it's all about speed to edit. We think that's where the cloud can really help. If you can leverage the connectivity by maybe going on an offline online workflow, then the cloud can really get you into the edit sooner. And it does mean essentially that you can do that with your shoot and your edit and squish the schedule. So yes, I take on your point that the actual the money that you pay to your post house may well be more than you previously paid. However, if you look at it on a project basis, you may be able to deliver faster, you may be able to squish that schedule so you don't need to keep your staff on as long.
And what about Forscene? How do you cope with the ingest? Do you get involved in that side?
Oh, I mean, for us, it's about what does the client want to do. So, I mean, we have over 60 installs just in the UK of Forscene. We're a software as a service company. We don't want to sell hardware. But what we also don't want to do is make it a tedious process of getting your content into our platform. So what we have is in our post houses, we have about 30 post houses, Doc 10 is one. What we have is we do have a server, but it's attached to your edit share or your RSS, and it's an automated process. So when you put your content into your Avid workspace, we automatically transcode that and put that up into the cloud. so that you are not having to go through a manual dual ingest process. And then you work with it in the cloud and you export an EDL back to your Avid. It brings the metadata that you have and you can relink from there. We've got a lot of workflows right now where people want to be able to get the content directly from shoot. So for example, Bangkok Airport for us, Keo Films, they took one of our servers on location. They have a data wrangler backing up the cards every night in Bangkok at the production office. We just scan the workspace there, upload the content into the cloud. The production team sitting in London, they can see all the media the next day. They can start working on it, and more importantly, they can give feedback to a reality show to be able to say, editorially, we might need to change this, we might need to do that. We do the same with Gold Rush, with Envy. It's about getting the content up as quickly as possible. Decisions can be made. You can work within it. Once the media gets sent back every 3 weeks or gets couriered back as in the high res, you can always then re-link to that later. We also have a workflow with Sony where you can come straight off the Sony camera with their Wi-Fi and 4G dongle. And we work with that production with Maverick for Channel 4, where the self-shooters out in the field, actually the content goes straight off the camera, up into the cloud. We run a virtual ingest on Amazon and push the content into your Forscene account. So people actually, a few minutes behind what's been shot on location, can see what is happening directly from the camera. You don't need any of our hardware on set to do that. And the last one in sport is about us actually running virtualized services. So if you're doing live sport and you're using, for example, Microsoft Azure, we can take the live Azure feed and take that straight into Forscene, and you can basically cut it and push it back to Azure, and they will push it on to wherever you want that delivered. And all of that can be fired up as a specific, a lot of sport is about a specific event at a time. People don't want to buy things capital-wise and then say, well, let's amortize it. We've got a project coming up relatively shortly in the summer where all of it will be done as a virtualized service, and you don't have to actually be spending anything on hardware.
Okay, let's go back a little bit to the title, The Sky's the Limit, and something that you said earlier, Rowan. The demand for remote editing at the moment, I mean, is there any, really?
There's demand for logging.
Yeah.
There's demand for getting your media safely somewhere. I mean, you know, you've got your doc, what do you call it? Field doc. Field doc. We've got something called Raptor. These are all products that have been developed because people have found that getting from a file-based camera, you know, the insurance company requires them to actually protect that data pretty quickly. And if you can find a way to make sure that that media goes into the post-production process in a secure fashion, and you can log it, and you can start working with it, and you then come to relink to it later. You know, there was a couple of facilities a few years ago who decided that they would just avoid all proxy workflows altogether and go for full resolution workflows. They very quickly pulled back from that because the quantities of material that people are shooting made that an unsustainable model. But nonetheless, there are times when you do want to work at full resolution. So you've got all these different requirements, and we've got this fantastic cloud-based sort of internet thing that none of us can quite describe, but you know, it's the ability to collaborate across continents, across offices and so on, to do things quickly. And there's no doubt that we're all going to want to embrace that technology. You know, we were talking just as we came over here, Forscene is a market leader in so much as it's been around, as you say, for a long time, offering all these services. But now, if you like, everybody else has recognized what they're doing, and they're snapping at their heels and keeping them on their toes and pushing them forwards, which is all going to add lots of new ways of doing production. But we've got to meet the lower cost base of production and use technology better.
Okay. Emma, your thoughts on this?
We are seeing demand for, I wouldn't say, we don't have someone come through the door and say, I'd like to work in the cloud. Or I'd like to work, we may have some people who come through the door saying, actually, I'd like to work from home on Friday.
Yeah.
So one of the other applications, I guess, is just so we can have an editor in the suite, and he's happily cutting away, and tomorrow he needs to be at home for whatever personal reason he needs to work at home. At the moment, that means editing on that program stops. And I think what the cloud can offer us, and especially on things like Central UX and eventually Media Composer Cloud, that's based on looking at the same sequence that he was working on today, being able to allow him to take a laptop home and work on the same sequence tomorrow morning when he's at home, I think that is quite limitless. I think that poses some quite nice applications, and it's not really about necessarily then saving the production money and the bigger wide workflow. It's actually about making people happier in their working environment and being more flexible in what can often be an incredibly labour-intensive, long hours, long days. It actually allows a little bit more flexibility to get the right talent to get the right thing. So, yes, we don't get people walking through saying, I want cloud. We get people walking away saying, I want to work more collaborative or better. Or although we do get people walking through saying, what new stuff have you got? Show me some new stuff. And I think we all kind of sympathise a little bit with that.
Yep.
So, BVE has done very well with that as well. So we do get some companies, other companies who don't want to go anywhere near the new stuff and want to make sure that's tried and tested before they even touch it. But other companies who just say, show me some new shiny toys that I can play with and maybe do things a bit differently.
Yeah.
Well, what do you think, Jason?
Well, I think because we've been around in the market here for 10 years and people have known us as a review and a logging system and a sync pool system, we almost have to go through a re-education to be able to go, actually, you can do a certain amount of the editing in this platform. In new territories that we've gone into, for example, in Toronto in Canada, we've actually gone straight in at the editorial level to say, actually, it's a tool you can use for editorial. And we've got some great take-up recently in exactly that. But they produce content differently to the way that we produce content here. Here, it's very much about the edit producer with the editor. So that's more of a complementary workflow. We have that fantastic term in the States called the predator, which is the editor and the producer rolled into one person. And that's more conducive to the kind of things that we have. It's then you don't need the editor sitting alongside the producer with in a single edit suite.
Isn't that just a natural progression from the self-shooter?
Yeah, pretty much.
You now see this produced, directed, and edited by credit quite often on programs on the telly.
Yep. Yeah.
Shot produced, directed, edited.
Shot produced, thought of.
Multi-skilled,
absolutely.
Cool
Delivered.
person.
Runner.
And if that person ever wants to work from home.
Yeah. but that's a great. That's great for us.
Yeah, because that's, I suppose, where remote editing might be seen as something that could easily be applied and would
I
be
think
designed.
creatively it's also quite emancipating because you can start coming up with program ideas that before you didn't think you could do. And I think we'll start getting quite frustrated with connectivity because it'll
Very
be the thing
quickly.
that holds people back, where they'll suddenly say, God, because of remote editing I can do it this way. And it'll be like, well, only if you're in the centre of a city with really good broadband connections. I mean, it was all in the paper the other day, wasn't it, that people in Covent Garden who can't send a 2-minute file down the road because it's quicker to put it on a key and run it down the road. It made all the national news, and and yet they're within a mile of
I think
Soho.
It's interesting though, even just when we talk about connectivity. So obviously these remote cloud workflows are based on download. When we were looking at ingest, we're obviously looking at upload. And every domestic broadband is optimized for download because it's meant to be for you getting your emails, streaming whatever you want from YouTube. So when we were actually looking at real times of ingest, connectivity became quite important.
Right.
So that's why we kind of incorporated a connectivity test because people didn't know what internet they actually had. But I think IP providers or service providers are really going to find themselves under a huge amount of pressure to change not only the service that they offer, but also the commercial model. So signing up for 12 months with a tiny amount of data because they're optimizing you to download your emails is not going to work for the broadcast industry. Certainly not if we start doing this on a regular basis. They're going to find themselves in difficulties. There are some people here, though, that are starting to bolt 4G cards together. So, our product's called Field Dock. At the moment, you need to be in some kind of Wi-Fi, so maybe not right in the middle of a field. But there are products now where you can take something in the field to be able to leverage the mobile phone network. But again, mobile phone contracts and 4G contracts are all about small amounts of data. So we really need to put pressure on those connectivity providers to change it.
Yeah.
It's changing. I mean, things like Netflix coming along, wanting to stream 4K and so on and so forth.
They're already getting wise to it.
Exactly.
But I think a lot of people also just went, well, cloud-based services, you need big bandwidth. And I think there's a bit of a misnomer in being able to use that. I mean, Forscene, for example, works between 1 and 1.5 megs of bandwidth. You get
but
your full
you're
frame
working on
rate.
a transcoded proxy.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is fine for logging. It may not be okay for editing.
Maybe.
It's strange. So Avid Central UX it does work on those low res, but actually at best results we're looking at more like 5 megabits per second download. And I did read that the average across the whole UK of download speed, domestic and businesses, is about 18.7, but that takes in megabits per second download. But that takes into account all of the businesses that have super optic fibre networks and also Media City, who has quite a bit. So, as an average, that's really buoyed up by the big businesses. I think if people go home now and log on to a free speed test to see what they would get, I think, like you say, 10 dells down the road, and depending on your service provider, you're going to get a different service depending on who you've gone with for your home broadband.
Okay, well, I thought that's very interesting. Does anyone have any questions to our panel here? Yeah. Sorry, I think we do have a microphone somewhere. Apologies. Just where is that? It's quite difficult to hear with all the noise of the show. Well, you might have to shout anyway, by the looks of it. Okay, looking at shouting then, I think. Sorry, could you might?
The question is, do you do conforms in the cloud? Is that right?
Yep.
You can.
Yep. Yep.
We are for our Red B clients and for our Star clients. Yeah. How are we consuming the right? Okay, so a conform will be measured by how easily when you get an EDL, you find the media, you relink it, you've got a sequence, you have a look at the sequence, it's running smoothly, and you're comparing it to an offline, and it's there, and then you're taking it to the finishing process. So you're not QCing at that point your content or the quality of your content necessarily, because it's going to go through a finishing edit and an audio session and everything else, and at that point they'll all be checking with the client, hopefully in situ, to go, hang on a minute, that's not right. And one of the problems with data curating is this absolute key that we've got to get to a stage where we all understand the importance of the directory structure and the management of the data that we use, and we still haven't quite got there yet. It's better than it was, but it's still not there yet. And when you get to a point where nothing is in a directory with the same name as something else, your conforms aren't going to go wrong. And then you'll get your timeline. You can be sure that it's right. It hasn't got any black holes in it. You start finishing process, and you'll know very quickly if there's anything missing. Yes?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, we do a lot of conform, but it's all in the sports and news environment. So what happens is we take in live streams. We actually cut a mezzanine level. So if you're bringing us a 50 megabit source, we'll create, so for example, the client wants maybe a 12 megabit source because it's all for mobile and web distribution. So when we did the London Olympics for NBC, we ingested all 70 streams here in London, and they had 50 editors sitting in 30 Rock in New York. What happened is all the packaging was done within Forscene. We conformed all of that, and then it went through a review and approval process, but mostly from an editorial perspective, and then we would push it out to a CDN that would then distribute it to where it needed to go. But generally, and the requirement there is that we had to actually conform it faster than real time. So if it's something like a 45-minute second clip, we had to do it in 30, 40 seconds as a conform, because for sport and news, very often it's just about who gets it out there the fastest, because often there's advertising revenue that comes with that. So it's all about speed more than anything else.
But don't you think we're really moving away from conforms and towards relinks?
Yes.
I mean, we're all working off a low-res proxy of the material, but, it won't be long now before we go, okay, I'm happy with that. Now please apply this to the full value media, and off we go,
Yeah.
In which case, again, the sort of QC process isn't quite so key at that point.
Any more questions? Yeah, you're going to really have to come forward, aren't you? Sorry, can someone just say what the question was?
So I guess it's the client expectation between, obviously, what they expect to see maybe a higher resolution copy in their offline.
So the question is, if the client gets terribly used to seeing offlines as proxies really, really quickly, are they going to start getting frustrated with the fact that online resolution media is so much slower to handle and so much more inaccessible?
I think you're right. I think they probably will do. I think, though, but what will change that dynamic, though, is that if we was going to stay at HD for the rest of time, I think absolutely their frustration will remain, and they'll say, well, you know, I was doing this last year on offline and now I'm on online. Why hasn't this got quicker? There's now an expectation that technology needs to keep up with us. I think what will supersede that, you know what I'm going to say, is things like 4K, a higher frame rates. They're now going to see people go, oh, well, that's why, because I've shot in 4K. So we do a number of dramas in our post-production facility in Salford. So we do Happy Valley and Cucumber, Banana and Tofu for Channel 4. And they shot in 2K, 4K and 5K. And so they were incredibly sympathetic for us getting the raw media in, transcoding it to a proxy resolution, and then obviously that conform process, because they said, God, it's 4 times as much storage as I gave you for my HD drama that I did last year. So they were like, oh, and you can do it, and it's not taking 4 times as much time. Brilliant, great. Now, obviously, that will happen now. Give us 5 years' time or whatever. They'll still say, well, you know, I was doing 4K 5 years ago. Why haven't you moved on? Why hasn't this process got quicker? So I think higher frame rates and higher resolutions are going to keep that expectation still kind of dampered down and not expect it to be super fast.
Yeah, I mean, we constantly also working on our codecs, because what you have is a resolution and everybody's happy with now. In a year's time, they're not happy with that anymore.
Yeah.
So, for example, we've now have a higher res of what we've done, but what people don't want is they wanted to actually be able to work on the same bandwidth as what the low res was. So what we have to do is constantly just optimize what we have. So, for example, in sport, the low res proxy, when we first came into it, clients were going, but actually, when I want to look at the small graphics, you know, especially in athletics, a big graphic comes up. If it's a comparison to, say, an Avid 15:1, they can't quite see what the score is or what the time is or whatever that might be. So we've now had to then enhance the proxy. But then as you say, well, here's a better proxy, then they go, but now you've doubled the bandwidth. Well,
So
there's a trade-off.
Yeah.
What do you want? You know, do you want the better quality, or you want, you know? But that's our kind of job as technology and software vendors, is to try and bring those two as close as we possibly can to make the client happy. Quality versus infrastructure and what you have, and being able to serve it.
And it's the same in Avid's platform as well. So when you're using their remote capabilities like Central UX, you can toggle between 3 different qualities of proxy, but obviously, and also on latency as well. But also, as you say, if you're going to see some degradation in the performance of the application if you're always going in at the highest possible frame rate. So I do expect that to change as connectivity again gets better.
Yeah, I think there's a production issue here as well, in that people expect to be working with craft editors and working with the material at full resolution. They still expect to be in an environment where it's a darkened room, grey walls, you know, specially lit, you know, etc. Whereas, and if they're looking at it remotely at that point, they're looking at FTP just to check the spellings are correct or that the content is legally correct and compliant and so on. So I think there is still this understanding of a difference in the stages that they're at and the creativity and the kind of service they're going to get around that media at that point. You know, over time, proxies are effectively a compromise. Over time, we'll get rid of them.
Well, a 4K proxy is now HD, isn't it? So
yes.
Go figure.
Okay, any more? Anyone else want to? Well, yeah. Maybe have a microphone and everything, but let's.
When you were talking earlier about resistance from some clients to use the cloud services available, do you think integrating FaceTime would sort of reduce that resistance? So you can have a situation where you know, the supplier of the video or whatever, if it is someone who's sending data to an editor to then work on a computer in a different location, like, do you think FaceTime would be an asset to that?
Yes.
Or
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
any of these social. We Skyped to plan today, you know. It's so much,
Badly.
you know, rather
Yeah.
than doing it on the phone, you know.
Yeah, badly.
actually
Because of
procedure.
BBE Wi-Fi.
Badly, yeah, absolutely. But, you know, there's no doubt that you can't just take technology forward without remembering that programs are made by human beings and creatively. And if you try and let technology take over to the point where the creativity doesn't come through, then it doesn't work anymore. And resistance is partly around people being scared that they can't make their programs as well. But of course, all the time you're Skyping or FaceTiming or any of those things, you're using some of that precious bandwidth that you would otherwise be using to get at the material and so on. So there's a compromise there.
I know bandwidth is an issue. Yeah.
But I'll give you an example for European Tour, because European Tour is, even though it's called European Tour, it's in South Africa, it's in South America, it's in Thailand. What happens is our client has 3 production teams, one in Germany, one at IMG, and one in Wimbledon, all cutting content for different distribution markets, but all collaboratively doing it in one environment within Forscene. We have a built-in chat system that everyone can talk to each other. So the actual the producer on location can kind of be going, right guys, we're kind of ready to go, and there's an interview that's going to come through, and this is going to happen. Somebody else can be saying, well, and if you actually have a look at their logs, it's quite extensive on how the guys are communicating between what they're doing, and some of it's just straight, how's the weather? You know, how's it going where you are? You know,
Social interaction.
it's kind of social
normal
chat.
stuff.
Yeah.
Well, we've got a job going at the moment with 11 offline suites running. It's got one edit producer. Now, that edit producer is not sitting in every single one of those 11 suites all simultaneously, because then they'd have to be 11 of them. So, you know, there are probably whole days when the editor is working completely independently and the edit producer puts their head around the door on the beginning and end of the day and says, is everything all right? So we shouldn't imagine that people have to sit with editors all day long. Dramas, the editors can spend days, you know, cutting before they have another sort of review. Films the same. The creative process around all the trailers and promos we're doing for BBC and UK TV will rely on the creatives working for quite a long time remotely from the central, you know, on proxies from the central data, and then going to their line managers or to their customer or whatever else and saying, right, this is what I've done and these are some variations and which one do you like? So we just have to find ways to make it work, and it will, and it does.
Nice. Anyone else? Okay. Well, just remains to say thank you very much to a great panel, and yeah, thank you. Good night.
Thanks.